Welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. I'm Jason Shebilske alongside Kirien Sprecher. Today, we'll discuss this week's action from around the league, including Caitlin Clark's return to the court. We'll also break down some of our top waiver wire ads ahead of the All-Star break. And finally, we'll discuss some of the top matchups we're looking forward to ahead of the short week. Again, we have a new look. For a limited time only, you can use the code YouTube15 for 15% off any RotoWire subscription. We have plenty of new and exciting RotoWire WNBA content coming your way, and the subscription now gets you access to the RotoWire football draft kit for free. And there are plenty of useful features to check out on there, including draft plans, pick suggestions, and insights on the rest of your league. I'm looking forward to testing out the new features in my fantasy football drafts, and the code YouTube15 will get you the best price. During today's show, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and we'll get them answered. If you ask live, we'll get them answered on the show, but we'll also be active in the comments afterward to provide any additional insight as well as on social media, so feel free to reach out to us anywhere. It was an eventful week for some of the league's top players as Caitlin Clark returned to action and A'ja Wilson avoided a major injury. Kirien, what are some of your takeaways from Clark's performances now that she's back in action?
Yeah, I think you just have to start with the shooting percentage, right? We all know Clark is a flamethrower and she can hit from anywhere when she gets hot, but she hasn't found a rhythm, and this has kind of been an all-season thing. I know the injuries probably play a little bit of part of into that, but this has just been going on all season, and it needs to be addressed. She's shooting 29% through 12 appearances and 26% in the 3 games since she returned to action. She shot 34% as a rookie last year. So, I expect things to trend up eventually, but a new coach, new teammates, a new system. Obviously, there's some growing pains here. The other concern with Clark is that she hasn't played more than 26 minutes in these 3 games. So the poor shooting percentage, the limited minutes suggests like she's on the court. She has to be, the expectation is that she's 100%. She's playing in games, but it's clear with the shooting percentages and the limited playing time that she's not quite hitting on all cylinders, I think is the best way to say it. Give her some time, maybe the break will reset things, and then the second half she'll get going. There's still a lot of WNBA regular seasons to go to play, and obviously in the fantasy business, the fantasy playoffs start way before the regular playoffs do. So we'll be talking about fantasy playoffs here soon, but there's still a lot of WNBA games to go on. So I think Clark will, turn things around eventually. The good in these 3 games, she's getting her teammates involved, 22 assists over the last 2 games, and those were both double-digit 15-plus point wins for the Fever. So, some good, some bad, and I expect that bad to round into shape before too long.
Yeah, and the encouraging part, too, is that even in what I think we would both consider to be a cold spell for Clark in general, she's posted 25 ESPN fantasy points, then 26, then 44. So the upside is still there. I think that just the last time she came back from an injury absence, she posted 62 fantasy points. So we were maybe looking for more than she's done in general. But even before her absence, her efficiency just really wasn't there. And that's kind of been a league-wide trend among some of the league's sharpshooters recently, between Clark, Sabrina Ionescu, Jewel Lloyd. All of them have really kind of struggled from the floor. And I don't think that it's necessarily related to one another. Like they're all like different players and such. But it is definitely interesting to see, and hopefully the All-Star break will help all of those players really just kind of turn things around from an efficiency standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fair to lump those players together, even if it's for different reasons. That those are for fantasy purposes. I feel like that's a fair tier to put them all in, even though Clark is probably above them all when she gets going. The last thing I would say about Clark is that 22 assists, she's only had 4 turnovers during those 2 games. The two turnovers in each of those games, those are both season low marks. So, while the shooting efficiency isn't there, she's still being a really efficient offensive player. 22 assists to 4 turnovers, a 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio is incredibly elite.
Right. And the good news is that as long as the shot volume remains there in standard ESPN scoring leagues, you don't have to worry about efficiency. So if the points and just general production is still coming. Fantasy managers will take it any way they can get it. On the bad news side of things, we also saw Rhyne Howard go down with a knee injury. She was carried off the court, and it's not yet clear how much time she'll miss. But who do you think could step up if she misses additional time?
Yeah, certainly didn't look good. Obviously, hopefully, with the All-Star break, even if it's a minor thing, she can get a couple weeks off and then be full go for the second half. But without Howard, Maya Caldwell got the start on Sunday, played pretty well. So I think that's the obvious answer here. Without its star, Atlanta still played New York pretty tight. So I would be surprised if they were like, oh no, we're gonna move on from that. Like you play New York tight, you probably stick with that lineup for another game or two. If Howard has to miss time post All-Star break, I think Te-Hina Paopao, we've talked about her a lot. I think she has the highest upside. But right now, her role has just diminished and reduced over the last couple of weeks. So, this may be worth a flyer or maybe just monitor her. I think Paopao has higher upside. But if she's seeing 7 minutes a game, it doesn't matter. So I think Caldwell is a safe option here. And, she still has a good upside with Howard out, just probably not as high as Paopao.
For sure. And one thing that you've consistently preached on the show is that on ESPN, Rhyne Howard is listed as a guard. She's kind of a guard forward hybrid. So I think that there will be a lot of production to go around. It just might kind of depend on what opponent the Dream are playing on that given night, because because of Howard's versatility, she's able to do so much on a game-to-game basis that sometimes if they're playing a smaller lineup, they might need more guards on the floor. Sometimes they might need more forwards. So I agree with your analysis that Caldwell and to a lesser extent Paopao are kind of the routes to go. But don't be surprised if some of the other Dream forwards, like maybe Naz Hillman or
for sure.
Those types of players, if they
Naz had a really good game on Sunday too. So I think that's a great point. The guard forward thing. I think Hillman probably Hillman has a higher upside than Caldwell. Hillman plays more often when everyone's healthy, right? So I feel like she's more trusted in the lineup. But yeah, I think that's a good point. I would definitely take Hillman over Paopao for sure.
Yeah, and she has just a more predictable role. So I think that the floor is there, whereas Caldwell is one of those players. She's maybe not rostered in as many leagues because people she's kind of off the map when the team is fully healthy. But if either of them are out there, I think they're both worth considering. And speaking of players who could step up, several players have already improved recently and weren't being rostered more than they are already. The first is a familiar name in Leonie Fiebich. She generated plenty of preseason buzz and slightly underperformed to begin the regular season, but she's stepped up since returning from Eurobasket, including back-to-back performances with at least 34 ESPN fantasy points. She is rostered in about the mid-40s for percentages on ESPN, so she's definitely on a lot of rosters out there, but for leagues, especially really shallow ones where she might still be available, she certainly seems to be stepping into that role that we expected heading into the regular season.
Yeah, 100%. Especially without Jonquel Jones, I feel like Fiebich should be rostered in probably 80-85% of leagues. So I think that's fair, even though she's rostered in 40%. It should be double that, especially as long as Jonquel Jones is out. I have no issues with this. Fiebich is the glue piece for this New York team. Ionescu, Stewart, Jonquel Jones, those are stars. Leonie Fiebich just does all the dirty work. She plays great defense. She'll hit threes when she's open. Just a really, really solid, awesome player, and deserves to be rostered in more than 40% of leagues.
Yeah, and Jones's return timetable is just labeled as quote after the All-Star break at this point, which the All-Star break is looming. So it could be as early as early next week, or it could be pushing into August or something. So I think that Fiebich definitely warrants consideration until proven otherwise, basically. So if Jones comes back and Fiebich's role drops a little bit more, she could maybe land back on the waiver wire. But for now, I think that she warrants rostering.
Yeah, even when John Quell comes back, I would say Fiebich should probably be rostered in 3/4 of leagues, right? Like she's a starter. She'll remain a starter when Jones comes back. I just think that especially with Jones out, she gets that boost and she should be rostered in the majority, if not every league.
Absolutely.
So another player who missed time due to Eurobasket, but is back in a starting role and ready to dominate is Janelle Salaun. I've mentioned her a couple of times. I mentioned her last week. Coming back from Eurobasket, had a minor role, but now she's back. 20 plus minutes in back-to-back games. She was back in the starting lineup on Sunday. 16 points, 6 rebounds during that game. She averaged 12 points and 6 rebounds in 28 minutes over her first 8 appearances this season, right? So I like Salaun. We've talked about Golden State's lineup, right? And every time we're doing projections, like you can't project any of them to play over 30 minutes because they all play like 26. And then, the bottom of the roster gets crazy too. Janelle Salaun is different for this team. She is a young player. She shows star potential. Even if she isn't a star yet, she is probably has the highest potential on this team. She is going to get time. The Valkyries are good. They probably are going to prioritize winning over development too, but I think Salaun fits both of those. I think she's one of their best players that can help them win, and they need to give her developmental minutes. I'm all in on Janelle Salaun right now, rostered in almost only 40% of leagues, I think it was, or 20% of leagues. It has to be more than that. I hope by next Monday it's up over 50%. I don't have to put her on this segment again, but if she's not, I'm going to buy your stock in Janelle right now.
Yeah, and she's one of those players where she had just 13 minutes over 2 games after returning to the WNBA. So I think there might have been some uncertainty, like, okay, will she reclaim that role that she had before? And it's just been one performance so far, a start against the Aces over the weekend. But she played just 21 minutes in that start, but posted 16 points and 6 rebounds. So I think it's safe to say that she is back, and she might have those occasional like duds of performances because the Valkyries do have a lot of mouths to feed. They're moving things around, and there are a lot of moving pieces. Just as a new franchise, is understandable to have. But I think that especially if Janelle Salaun can retain a starting role down the stretch, that she has that kind of sustainable production that you like to see in ESPN fantasy leagues, between like occasional defensive production, solid scoring, solid rebound. So I think that she's someone who could definitely contribute down the stretch. And then we have a question from Bealistic, who is new to the WNBA. First off, welcome. He's asking, is Aaliyah Boston good? She absolutely is. I would say she entered the season around the top 10 in rankings. I think she might have been number 9 or so. Now that the season is underway and we're seeing her performances, I would say that she's more in that top 5 to top 10 range, maybe somewhere around 6 or 7. She shot 58.3% from the floor this year, which would be a career high mark if the season ended today. There are definitely a lot of mouths to feed in Indiana between Caitlin Clark and a lot of the other players there, like Natasha Howard, Lexi Hull, Sophie Cunningham. But I think that Aaliyah Boston has certainly established herself as an elite contributor in the WNBA since being the number 1 overall pick in 2023. And she hasn't yet missed a game during her WNBA career. So the availability is there, the production is there. She's been as consistent as they come with a lot of upside. So if you're looking for a solid fantasy option, Aaliyah Boston definitely is one.
Yeah, and like we talked about at the beginning of the year, if you're playing WNBA fantasy on ESPN, you have to prioritize power forwards and centers because there's more. You have to have at least 3 where you have to have 2 guards and then a flex. So there's an extra spot for forward. So if you want to trade for Aaliyah Boston, great cornerstone to your team, can set it and forget it every week. Me and Jason and I recently participated in a dynasty WNBA fantasy league. The first pick obviously was A'ja Wilson, then Caitlin Clark, then Angel Reese, Nafisa Collier, Brianna Stewart, Alyssa Thomas, and then I went Aaliyah Boston. And I probably would have taken Aaliyah Boston over Alyssa Thomas and Stewie at this point. Young player, and like Jason said, just so consistent. And when you in fantasy sports, in any fantasy sport, all fantasy managers want is that one player that can deliver you elite, consistent production. You get that, you can figure everything else out. And Aaliyah Boston is that player.
For sure. And one of the things that we talk about with Caitlin Clark is she brings everyone around her up even more. But I think that especially this year, now that Caitlin Clark is missing some games, we're seeing that Aaliyah Boston is definitely boosted by Caitlin Clark's passing abilities, but she's also kind of Clark proof, if to make up a new term, in the sense that some of the other players on the team will see their production drop a little bit when Clark is off the court. That doesn't really happen with Boston. She is consistent night in and night out, and it's really impressive to see as she enters her third WNBA season. So thanks so much for that question, and be sure to stick around as the season progresses for more WNBA advice here. Moving on to another waiver pickup, Bria Hartley has had some inconsistent performances this year, but she's been more reliable recently, posting at least 14 ESPN fantasy points in each of her last 4 appearances, while also generating some upside as she's had at least 28 fantasy points in 2 of those outings. She's had a starting role for about a month and a half now and should at least have ample opportunities to generate fantasy appeal as long as Marina Mabrey is sidelined. Mabrey is one of those players like Jonquel Jones, as we talked about earlier. Her return timetable is simply after the All-Star break, so it's possible that Hartley's role declines as early as next week, but I think that she's certainly worth rostering and holding right now. And she's rostered in just 5.2% of leagues, so she's available basically everywhere. And she's kind of one of those long shot pickups that we'll talk about, but she's had pretty consistent production recently. And not to mention, Connecticut has been pretty successful in the win-loss column during that time relative to their season-long standards. So I don't think that they'll be looking for ways to take Bria Hartley out of usage, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And while Hartley, rostered in 5% of less than 5% of leagues is a longer shot, I think with Mabrey's sideline, I also want to give a shout out to Saniya Rivers. Needs to be rostered in more leagues, only 20% of leagues right now. Rivers has had only 2 single-digit ESPN outings since June 1st. We were just talking about consistency with Aaliyah Boston. That is pretty great consistency from the rookie. She's also had 4 straight with at least 20 ESPN fantasy points and is coming off a season high 38 ESPN fantasy points against the Sparks. So consistency is there. Now she's displaying the upside over that 4-game stretch: 13 points, 5 boards, 3 assists, 2.5 steals, and a block in 33 minutes. I don't really know what else to say. That's I don't want to jinx anything. This is just one of those performances where you're like, this is incredibly consistent, and it seems like it's projectable out for the rest of the season. Just knock on wood and hope that stays consistent. Obviously, with Mabrey coming back, we'll see how that changes things. But like you said, Connecticut has been better than they were at the beginning of the season, so maybe they just decide to roll with this hodgepodge of guards and let Mabrey, sit on the bench for the rest of the season because she wasn't really contributing to winning anyways. But obviously that's a lot of conjecture there. Obviously, if Mabrey's healthy, she'll probably come back. But in the meantime, there's a lot of guards in Connecticut that are playing well, and I think Rivers is probably like the safest bet right now. But she's also rostered in more leagues than Hartley, or I think you'll talk about another one in a little bit.
For sure. And it wouldn't be out of the question to see Marina Mabrey come off the bench upon her return, because last year, albeit it was with a different coaching staff, over the second half of the season after she was traded, she came off the bench in a lot of those appearances. She was still a really fantasy relevant player, and I think that she still will, even if she doesn't reclaim a starting role upon her return. But I think that there will be a lot more guard production outside of her to factor into that, because as we said, if they are winning or at least competing in games, I don't think that they'll be looking to rock the boat too much. And it at least gives them some flexibility to ease Marina Mabrey back into action if they don't feel as though she's fully ready. And one thing with Saniya Rivers over someone like Bria Hartley is that Saniya Rivers had a starting role even when Marina Mabrey was available. So she's one of those players who is like a high floor, high upside player compared to Bria Hartley, who's maybe more of a low floor, high upside player. Hartley, it wouldn't be surprising to see her put up like 0 to 5 fantasy points, especially once Marina Mabrey is back in action. But she could also have those outings where she has like 25 plus points. Saniya Rivers has kind of established herself as like a double digit fantasy point contributor with the potential to consistently post 20 plus points as well. So I would definitely go with Rivers as far as the safer option. And I think that once Mabry is back in action, that there will still be a lot of chances for Rivers to step up. And we've talked up Aziaha James for several weeks on the show, and she has remained productive recently, but her rostership on ESPN has now risen above 20%. A teammate who is rostered still at a low number at 5.8% is JJ Quinerly, who retained a starting role Sunday against the Fever despite Arika Ogunbowale returning to action. Quinerly was unable to extend her streak of games with at least 30 fantasy points to 4 games, but she still finished with 19 points and should be able to retain plenty of fantasy appeal, at least while Dejanay Carrington remains out. And Dejanay Carrington is kind of a question mark. She also doesn't have a timetable to return, but even before her absence, she just was like her role was declining already. So it wouldn't be surprising to see Quinerly and Aziaha James as well, just like kind of maintain that role that Carrington had. And then Carrington might be forced to compete for minutes because Dejanay Carrington has proven to be a solid player throughout her time in the WNBA. But James and Quinerly are younger players who should be able to factor more into the Wings' long-term development. So if they're productive and they're able to maintain playing time, I don't think that the Wings will necessarily be looking to shove them out of the rotation anytime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about development, and when you have Paige Beckers, you might as well get those players that are going to play with her for the next 4 or 5 years. Get that chemistry now than later. And the only other thing that I would mention is I saw Carrington when she was healthy. There was a couple clips on social media where her and the coach did not seem to be seeing eye to eye. I'm not trying to read too much into the social media thing, but new team, new setting. They didn't play very well at the beginning, and like you said, there's young players that are ready to chomp at the bit to take your role. This is the W. This is why we're expanding, because these young players are ready to take these veteran roles as soon as they open the door for them. So sticking in Dallas, we've talked about this center rotation for a while now. There was the Eurobasket absences of McCowan and Geiselsloder and Lee Yueru trade, and there's been a lot of moving parts. Lee Yueru is still rostered in only 9% of leagues. She continues to start. Geiselsloder starts alongside her, but Yueru has been more productive, 25 plus ESPN fantasy points and 3 of her last 4. For a player that's rostered in less than 10% of leagues, I don't think it gets much better than that. Geiselsloder is a fine streaming candidate. I think both of these players have fantasy appeal. But Geiselsloder double-digit ESPN fantasy points in 4 straight. But I'm just rolling with Yueru as the higher upside play. I have been rostering her for a couple of weeks now, and I'm hoping I can roster her post All-Star break as well. I don't see any reason why things would change. And like you said, like Dallas is kind of playing well with these rookie guards. Ogunbowale really hasn't hit her stride yet. So I think Yueru is a core piece to Dallas right now, and I don't see her role changing anytime soon.
For sure. Yueru really flew under the radar early in the season because she just didn't have a role in Seattle's rotation. But she's had a starting.
Well, she was playing ahead of Malonga. Not saying like you're wrong. Her role was minor, but Seattle just has a crazy front court. So I feel like Seattle knew that she was good, right? Like, and they were playing her over the number 2 overall pick, and you're seeing all these other rookies. So I feel like Seattle knew she was good, but they were just like, there's never going to be a role for you. And they did the right thing, got her into a role, and now she's thriving.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think Seattle recognized her talent, but just there weren't enough minutes to go around for her to have consistent fantasy production. But over 7 starts with the Wings, She's posted double doubles in 3 of those appearances. So with under 10% rostership, she's probably available on most waiver wires out there. If you're looking at the waiver wire and you see a player who has posted double doubles in nearly half of her starts, I think that she's worth picking up. And Yueru has definitely done that. She's had a few like really lackluster performances during that time. So it might be good to temper expectations for fantasy managers picking her up. But even her lowest number since joining the starting rotation for fantasy points is 9, which isn't awful considering her rostership. So I think that she's definitely like a season long ad, and hopefully she'll be able to maintain that role after the All-Star break and help during the fantasy playoffs as well. And then closing it out by moving back to Sun Guards, Leila Lacan is rostered in just 0.8% of ESPN fantasy leagues, but has topped 30 minutes of playing time in each of her last 2 appearances. She missed the start of the season due to overseas commitments, but she's claimed a role with the Sun upon her return, and she certainly carries some fantasy relevance as long as she can maintain a decent amount of playing time. The biggest question, as we talked about earlier, is what her role will look like once Marina Mabrey is healthy. But the Sun are going to wait until at least next week to have her suit up again, so Lacan should at least have ample opportunities to contribute during Tuesday's game against the Sun, and she's an intriguing player to watch after the break as well.
Yeah, no comments here. We talked about the Sun rotation in plenty with Hartley and Rivers, and I think Lacan is in that same boat. Obviously, just a tier down from those other 2.
For sure. And with the All-Star break happening next weekend, we do have a short week ahead of us in terms of regular season play. But the week begins with the matchup that we've seen several times recently, as the Lynx and Sky are set to face off in Chicago on Monday. The Sky finally appear to be finding their footing with back-to-back wins, including a win over Minnesota on Saturday. I don't want to get too into betting lines here since this is more of a fantasy-centric show. The Sky being 10.5-point underdogs at home feels like too big of a spread at this point, because I still think that they're probably on the outside looking in as far as the end of season playoff picture, but I think that there will be a lot more games where they're more competitive as the season progresses, especially now that Camila Cardoso is back.
Yes, absolutely. I think Cardoso is that key here. Angel Reese, I've said it on the show. I think she could get multiple MVP votes this year. She got one last year. I think that's a possibility, but I think Cardoso is the player that makes this team, a playoff team, right? And with Cardoso healthy, I was all over. You talking about the betting line? This weekend I was all over the Sky there. I think there were 12-point underdogs, and I had my finger hesitating over that money line, and then I was like, maybe this is just my fandom speaking. I'll just stick with the spread, and they got the big dub. And then obviously the Vegas thought that was a fluke. I'll probably hammer this one again. I don't know if the Sky will get another victory, but I think with Reese and Cardoso together, the Sky can make a push for the playoffs. But like I said, as a Chicago, I have to throw that fandom in there because that might just be that talking. But Cardoso is fantastic. We were talking about Aaliyah Boston earlier from Bialistic. Great question. Cardoso is right there with Boston, not right there with Boston. I would say Angel Reese and Boston are like, those 2 young, like, cornerstones if you're playing in a dynasty league, but Cardoso is in that next tier, like right below them. I'm not going to put her in that tier 1 yet of Boston and Reese, but she's right there, and she's that top of that second tier for me.
Absolutely.
And moving on to another team, well talked about team in the WNBA, it's the Aces. Last week I put them on notice. I put them on a bright spotlight on them, and I said, you guys have to go 2-1 this week. If you don't, you're going to be in real trouble heading into the All-Star break. They went 1-2. They don't beat the Wings on Wednesday, and they're going to go into the break 2 games below 500. That's unheard of this era of the Aces. And I'm sure plenty of people are like, yeah, well, Kirien, 20 games left in the second half. You already said that earlier in the show. Lots of ball to be played. If they get into the playoffs, they can pull off an upset. Of course, I agree. if you look at the first 6 games of Minnesota's second half, they play or of Vegas's second half, they play Minnesota twice and Indiana once. So sure, there's 20 games left in the All-Star break. They lose to the Wings. They're 2 games below 500, and then they start the second half 3 of 6 against Indiana and Minnesota. You lose those 3 games. All of a sudden, there's only 14 games left, and you're still 2 games below 500. So that 20 games could shrink really fast. The Aces lost an opportunity last week. There's going to be more opportunities for them ahead of, or there are more opportunities ahead of them, but they need to turn things around quickly. Like the way that they're playing right now, I don't think they're not going to be favored in any of those 3 games against Minnesota and Indiana. They probably won't be favored in a game against like the Storm or Phoenix in the second half. So I'm really worried about the Aces. They need to turn things around quickly. The eye test is just as bad as the record is.
Yeah, and for most of the first half of the season, I kind of preached the case of, well, there's a lot of season left to be played. They'll probably at least sneak into the playoffs, and then anything can happen. Well, at this point, they're probably entering the All-Star break out of the playoff picture. And at this point, it sounds crazy to say given where preseason expectations were, but I think that I would prefer Golden State's upside compared to Las Vegas's at this point. It seems like Golden State, even when they do have off nights, they're still consistently improving upon their results night in and night out. The Aces is just kind of a crapshoot of where they will be on any given night. They might go toe to toe with the best of the teams in the league. Like during those games against Minnesota and the Fever, I think that it's possible that they're very competitive, but it's also very possible that they get blown out by 10, 20 plus points during those games. So you just don't know what will come in any given game for the Aces outside of A'ja Wilson just being as productive as always. So outside of A'ja Wilson, you just really don't know what's going to happen. And I'm definitely starting to push the panic button on the Aces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Golden State is the perfect comparison, right? Like they're close together in the standings, but they couldn't be more polar opposites, right? One team relies on their stars, another team has a super deep rotation. One team, it's the first year in the league, and the other team has been dominating the league forever. You know, the contrasts are ever present there. And we mentioned betting a little bit, so I'll just throw one more in there. If you're talking about a Golden State Las Vegas matchup that just happened, Las Vegas won by 2. That spread is going to be dead even probably. And if Vegas thinks that the Golden State and Las Vegas are on a level playing field, we should probably be treating them like they're on a level playing field at this point.
Absolutely. And that does it for this week's show. Kirien will be back next Monday at 1 p.m. Central with a special guest, RotoWire's chief NBA editor, Alex Barutha. Be sure to join us then, and thanks for watching.
Have a good vacation, Jason.
Bye.